Here we go. All right, very good. Good, excellent. How do you choose just the right lens for that picture you have in mind? What kind of criteria do you use? In a lot of ways, it could be like the way a golfer chooses the right club for a shot, or like a carpenter choosing just the right hand tool for a certain project. Today we're going to talk about what kind of decisions you need to make, what kind of variables you like to take into account when selecting a lens. I'm about 5 or 6 feet away from Anika here. We're going to start with a wide-angle lens, and on this camera, with this lens, it's about a 15mm lens. Now, the reason why you'd want to use a wide-angle lens is it gets a lot of background in. That's the big reason to do it. The other one, good for panoramas, good for landscape, good for scenery. The other reason is if you want to get a lot in, but you don't have a lot of throw or backing up. Let's say you're traveling somewhere and it's a small alleyway or a small roadway and your back's up against the wall. You want to get as most information in as possible. The other reason to use a lens like this is from a creative standpoint. What it tends to do, it brings the foreground forward and it recedes or pushes back the background. So pretty much for any lens, there's usually two reasons to use it. One is a practical one, and we'll talk about that in each case, and the other one is a creative one. And in this one, with a wide-angle lens, the creative aspect is that it brings the foreground important. It makes it much more important, it makes it much more in the foreground, and then it tends to minimize the background and push the background back. I'm going to take a quick test shot of Anika, and then we'll use that and compare them with the other three lens types later on. So I'm going to do that right now. We're all set up. Here we go. The second main category of lenses are called normal lenses. They're called normal because they render things normally, sort of the way your eye would see them. That's the practical reason, but that's also the creative reason to use that lens. It doesn't add anything to the picture, a normal lens. Optically, it doesn't make things look bigger or smaller. It doesn't do anything with the foreground or background. It just renders things in kind of an average, typical way, the way your eye would see them. That's why often you'd find photojournalists or fine art photographers wanting to use these lenses because of the way they render things in that neutral or sort of optically transparent standpoint. We're going to take that another test image, and I'm about 8 to 10 feet away from Anika, and I'm going to take that shot and we'll see how that looks in relationship to the foreground and background when we compare it to the other optics as well. The third main category of lenses are called telephoto lenses. The practical reason to use a telephoto lens is you want to reach out optically, make something that's far away seem closer to you and see more detail. The creative reason to use a telephoto lens is really just the opposite reason to use a wide-angle lens. The wide angles bring the foreground forward and recede the background. Telephotos, as I said, do just the opposite. They compress everything. They make the foreground and background and the midground almost a single focal plane. So if you've seen a photo where it seems like runners are stacked up to each other, or race cars, or even telephone poles or trees, that's a telephoto compression. That's the optical characteristic of that lens. So unlike the 50, which doesn't really add much to the situation, telephotos add a lot. Now, one thing to keep in mind with lenses, especially when you're using a zoom, as we are here, is there's also ranges. So there's a wide and there's an ultra wide. There's normal is pretty much in the normal range, but in telephoto, there's quite a large range. A short telephoto, which would be great for portraiture. A long telephoto, a really long one, is going to be better for wildlife or those action shots we were talking about. And that's the case. Let's just shoot that sample shot. Okay, well, let's review those images that we did to compare and contrast the three different main categories of lenses. The first one, of course, is going to be this wide-angle lens shot. Anika looks great. You notice that, again, this is kind of a medium wide-angle lens. She's pretty much in the center. Now, if we look at this picture carefully, we'll see first off, remember how much left to right images we're seeing in terms of how much background we're getting. And another important thing to notice is look down below at where her hand is and where her legs are. Her legs look a little bit distorted. They're a little bit enlarged from what they would be normally. And that, of course, is not her. That is what the lens is doing. Notice also her face looks kind of normal or typical. That's because she's in the sweet spot of that wide-angle lens situation, and she's really not getting distorted because she's in the middle, the sweet spot, where the distortion doesn't occur so much, whereas her legs are on the edge, and that's what we're seeing there. A final thing to notice is how relatively important she is in the picture. She's definitely pulled forward as opposed to the background, which is receding, which of course is exactly what wide-angle lenses do. Now we're looking at the normal lens. This is the one that renders as our eyes do, and as you can see, it pretty much looks just like that. Looks kind of an average picture. There's nothing really optically going on in particular. Look at the huge difference on Anika's legs. They're much more rendered as they would be the way they actually look for her. Notice also that the background is a lot less, we're just not seeing as much background. Also the background, if you look carefully, it's a little less, it's maybe a little bit softer focus than it was prior. Again, making it another indicator of more of a normal type of lens. But as I mentioned, this is kind of like what I'll refer to as an optically transparent lens. It doesn't really add anything optically to the shot. It doesn't take anything away. It just renders things in a nice, pleasant, sort of normal fashion. All right, this is the telephoto version. Notice right off the bat that we're seeing less background left to right than we had on any of the other shots. Also notice that Anika looks a little bit more compressed together with the background. The picture seems sort of optically flatter than the other ones do, and that's of course what a telephoto does. This is a medium telephoto on the zoom range. She looks great. This is a really good lens to do portrait and fashion work with. Anything to do with people is always good in telephoto. And again, compare and contrast. Every one of these lenses has their purpose, and both from a creative and a practical standpoint. All the pictures we've taken so far today have been with zoom lenses. There are three main categories of zooms, and it sort of follows the three main categories of lenses. You have a wide-angle zoom, it gives you a range of wide angles. You have sort of that medium range zoom, middle zoom, that you'll see sort of a wide-angle lens and sort of a telephoto lens on. And then finally, you'll see a telephoto zoom. And this would be sort of a medium telephoto to a pretty long telephoto in this particular instance. As I said, these are all zoom lenses. There are another type of lens, it's called a prime lens. These are two examples of a prime lens. They're both obviously very different physically. The reason you have a prime lens, let's say in this case, would be it's a specific single focal length. In this case, this one's a 50 millimeter, and on this camera body, that would be a very short sort of telephoto type of lens. Big difference in the lenses. You can see the difference right here. Twice the size, probably more expensive, also just a little bit heavier. The advantage of the prime is that it's a little lighter and a little less expensive, and it's real specific to exactly a focal length. Some people like that. They don't like to be switching around. They like let's say the discipline of just having a single focal length to work with. Another reason to have a prime lens is that it has a real specific function and does it very, very well. In this case, you have a 100 millimeter macro lens. Although this works perfectly well as, in this camera, kind of a longer telephoto lens, this works really well in the macro capabilities. Its real functionality is to come really close and make things really sharp. So the big comparison between a prime and a zoom is pretty much the following. In this case, you'd have something smaller, lighter, probably a little less expensive. And in this case, you'd have something a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier. But the big factor is the convenience factor. Here, just one focal length. This lens just does one thing. And all these lenses provide you with quite a range of focal length capabilities. You've seen samples of the three major lens groups: wide, normal, and telephoto. The takeaway is there's no exactly right lens for any particular photograph. The thing that you can do is, now that you know the basics, is go out there, experiment, shoot, and have a good time.